In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the calculation options in Kala Vedic Astrology software. Under the menus tab, we've got the options. And here we've got several options, with the topmost being the calculation options. And there we've got several screens of options. The one I want to start with is the Ayanamsha options. This is the option that lets you select the Ayanamsha you want to use for your Zodiac calculations and your Nakshatra calculations. And as you can see here, we have a lot of options. We've really made every effort to try to program or to get the material for as many Ayanamshas as possible. So you can see there's really an overwhelming amount of Ayanamshas to choose from. Now, the most common Ayanamsha that people use is the Lahiri Ayanamsha. And if you buy Kala and just install it with its default options, it'll default to the Lahiri Ayanamsha because of the fact that that's the most common and that's what people expect to see. However, if you are using Lahiri Ayanamsha with sidereal rashis, I always recommend people try the Ardra Galactic Plane Ayanamsha. Lahiri himself in the 50s was, a proponent of the Chitra Ayanamsha, where Chitra is put at the beginning of Libra. However, in his later years, Lahiri said if he could do it all over again, he would actually add about 27 or so minutes to the planetary positions as calculated by Lahiri. And the reason he said that is because the actual position of Chitra in the old books would require that. But he didn't calculate it correctly. He didn't use what's called the Dhruva coordinates, which is what those stars are given in. He just used the the ecliptic coordinates. So that gets into some heavy astronomy. But to make it simple, he himself said he would add about 27 or so minutes to Lahiri Ayanamsha, so the planets would advance. The Ardra Galactic Plane Ayanamsha supports that idea of Lahiri's. And this is what I used when I was using the sidereal zodiac long ago. There's still a lot of very successful astrologers out there who use this Ayanamsha. And if you are a sidereal astrologer and use sidereal rashis, I really would recommend checking out this, especially if you like Lahiri, but you feel like sometimes the dashas are happening just a little bit too late. Then using this Ayanamsha, the dashas will happen a little bit earlier. So you might want to check that out. But we have lots of options here. One thing I don't really recommend you use, there's one Dhruva Galactic Center Mula with Wilhelm, my name on it. We put that there because the Swiss ephemeris calculated that. However, their calculation doesn't quite come out to the exact same value as my calculation for it. And I recommend using my calculation, which is the Dhruva Galactic Center Middle of Mula. Basically the same thing, it's just I programmed this one, and this one here was programmed by the Swiss ephemeris, and I was hoping it to be a little bit more precise, but I'm actually liking my original one better. So if you're using my calculations, the ones that I like to use that one, not the one that has my name after it, okay? Alright, so we got all these Ayanamsha options, plenty to play with. You can also put a user-defined Ayanamsha where you'd click on here, then you could put like any date you want, say 0001, say the first year, and then you could put the Ayanamsha you want it to be that year, say 00, and it'll calculate the charts for that. So you can make your own customized Ayanamsha to select your research. Over here on the right, we've got some options that most of you aren't going to care about. Unless you're trying to do my system, you're probably not going to care about these unless you're a researcher. What these are, the first one, use tropical rashis with the above Ayanamsha for nakshatras. That one there is what I use because I like to use tropical rashis, but I like to use sidereal nakshatras. So I'll select my Ayanamsha over here for the nakshatras, and then click on the use tropical rashis so I get tropical signs instead of sidereal signs with that sidereal nakshatras though. Then under nakshatra calculations, there's a few different options. One is the Dhruva equatorial longitude for nakshatra position. That basically calculates the nakshatras along the equatorial belt. So every 13 degrees and 20 minutes of equatorial belt is one nakshatra. Most people like to calculate their nakshatras to where every 13 degrees and 20 minutes of the ecliptic belt or the zodiac sign belt is one nakshatra. If you like that, you'll want to have neither. And it defaults to neither because that's what most people use. In fact, if you are using the calculations that most people use, you probably won't need to change any of your options in Kala, but I still think it's important to understand them in case you ever want to try something. Then the use Dhruva use Dhruva ecliptic longitude for nakshatra position. That calculates the nakshatras along the ecliptic, but the ecliptic is divided based on segments of the equator. This is actually the way that the Surya Siddhanta and the other astronomical texts give the planetary positions. Okay, so these are some tools for people who've studied some of the old astronomy, want to play with. If you don't, haven't studied your astronomy, I suggest ignoring those things. All right, there's lots of other options in Kala, but the easy way is just go to options and customize. And under customize, you can skip through all of your options by going next, next, next. Or you have a couple preset recommendations. So the first one of these is the Ernst Wilhelm recommendations, which is tropical Rasi's with sidereal nakshatras, and a few other options selected how I would use them. Now, for most people, however, they're going to want to use the Dira recommendations, the Astro-Vedic recommendations, or just the defaults, which is going to be Lahiri Ayanamsha with sidereal signs, because that's what most people are used to using. The Dira recommendations and the Astro-Vedic recommendations both use the the Lahiri Ayanamsha with sidereal signs, but some are slightly different. For instance, one of them might have a different node calculation or a different dasha length calculation. So there's some minor things that are different, but for the most part you're going to get the same chart whether you use either of those recommendations. Okay. So the other options we have under the calculation options. In the general options, we've got all the just like big pile of stuff you can choose options for. The ones with the asterisks are the ones that I recommend. There's mean node or true node. There's geocentric or topocentric. Most people don't know what those are, but all Vedic astrologers use geocentric. Some Western astrologers like to play with topocentric, so we give it as an option. Fatal degrees, Philodipika and Saravelli give some different opinions. I found Philodipika better, so I have that as the default. The Trimsumsha used for calculations, this gives you an option to use an actual Trimsumsha chart. You get a chart with 12 signs where any planet can fall in any sign. If you do it based on the Trimsumsha lords, you'll never have a planet in Cancer or Leo. I find the Rashi divided by 30, a real chart, it works better. And this is rules according to Saravelli that tells us how to calculate that. The debilitation calculations, you can put the moon and Mercury in all of Scorpio and Pisces for debilitation, or just in part of it, depending on what your belief on that is. For Gemini, we have an option to use Rahu as the 8th Karaka, or the Lagna as the 8th Karaka. We don't have a 7 or 8 Karaka option because in the table where we have the Karakas, we show both the 7 and the 8 Karaka option in that one table. So we don't have it as a singular option. Then there's Gulika options. Most people aren't even going to be aware of what Gulika is, but it is a child of Saturn, and it's used for some techniques. And some people say to calculate it for the beginning or the end, so that's an option there. For yogas, you can search yogas with Rashi aspects or planetary aspects according to your preferences. You can determine the temporal friendships from the Rashi chart or the individual Varga chart. I like to use the Rashi chart because Parashara says in the sutra where he says planets that are on, in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or the 10th, 11th, or 12th from a planet are its friends, the rest at that time, and the rest are its enemies. So the fact that he uses the word at that time refers to the Zodiac chart, which is the time chart. All the Varga charts have nothing to do with time, but you can tell time from the Rashi chart. So I tried using the temporary friendships from the Rashi chart and carrying that into the other Vargas and found it worked better. The Tajika system of astrology also considers the temp friendship in the Rashi chart and carries it to the other Vargas. So that's an option you can also select. Pindadi Ayurdaya is a technique for calculating the length of life and also a dasha. You can either use the Rashi chart or the Bhava Chalita chart for that, depending on your opinion about that. For the Vajrapati calculation in Varshafal solar returns, you can use the exact aspect value, or you can use a simple aspect value, meaning the aspect's either on or off, or the exact aspect value says, well, the aspect is this much out of 60. For combustion, you can use the modern method of using ecliptic degrees, or you can use the Surya Siddhanta Varaha Mihira method and all the old Siddhanta methods, which actually concern themselves with observational degrees. So you can have a person in New York who looks up and a planet's invisible behind the sun, but from the point of view of someone in France at the same moment, they might look up and see the planet, because visually it's not obliterated by the sun's rays in both places. If we assume to use the ecliptic degrees for that, we're assuming that it's not visible anywhere on Earth, which is simply not true. Varaha Mihira, Surya Siddhanta have chapters devoted to calculating planetary combustion correctly. And the only astrologer I've come across who is aware of that and also uses this method is Hart Defoe. Most people simply use the degrees in the zodiac for combustion. But you'll find that if you look like a planet's combust, say that Mars is 14 degrees from the sun, and that means he's combust, because he's combust within 17 degrees. You go outside and you see Mars. That's not combustion. When a planet's combust, you go outside, you can't see it. That only works if we measure it in accordance with visual degrees, meaning from where you're at on Earth and you look up, can you see that planet, or is it indeed behind the sun? It's kind of like eclipses. If you want to calculate the time of an eclipse, you can't just see when the sun and moon are conjunct in the zodiac by Rahu or Ketu. Because of the moon's latitude, when the moon actually gets in the way of the sun, will change based on where you are. That's why we had a recent huge eclipse across the United States. It was only visible as a full eclipse in part of the United States. From the northern more parts and the more southern parts of the United States, that eclipse was a partial eclipse because of the angle of the viewer. And that's the same principle that were meant to be used for combustion. Okay, so be aware of that, that according to all the old texts, according to Varaha Mihira, that's not how we do combustion based on ecliptic degrees. Okay, and Kala is actually the only software that calculates combustion according to observational degrees. House systems, we have several house systems, a lot of Western house systems. You can choose middle or house or beginning of house. Western astrologers and also KP, Krishnamurti Parati, uses the beginning of the house. The old other Vedic astrologers and Vedic astrology texts consider the middle of the house to where the cusp falls. For time calculations, Pranapada, Bhava, Hora, and Gatika Lagna, we can calculate for Yamakoti, which is the ancient prime meridian. We can calculate for Lanka or Ujjain, which some Indians consider the ancient prime meridian, although Surya Siddhanta is very clear that Yamakoti is the ancient prime meridian. Or you can do the modern convention of calculate for local place. Varaha Mihira says calculating the time at the local place doesn't make sense. We have to calculate it for a prime meridian. By time, I mean like the Vara and the Hora. And at Parashara, in Brihat Parashara, when he tells us how to calculate the Bhava, Hora, and Gatika Lagna, he says a sutra at the end that everyone ignores. He says the birth ascendant, the Janma Lagna, is different at the same time at all places on Earth. But the Bhava, Hora, and Gatika Lagna are the same at all places at the same time on Earth, which only can be done if we calculate them for some ancient prime meridian. Okay, so that's what that option is. In the Siddhamsha, we can calculate your normal Siddhamsha, or we can go reverse for even signs. So for a planet, say, in Cancer, in the second Siddhamsha, we go Cancer Gemini, not Cancer Leo. It's another option. Then we have Ashtaka Varga calculations. You can choose Parashara or Varaha Mihira based on your preference. It defaults to Parashara. Then we have some dasha options. For year length for nakshatra dashas like Vimshatri dasha and Yogini dasha, and any such dasha based on the nakshatra position, you have several years. You can use the nakshatra year, which is how many times it takes the nakshatras to travel around the Earth, 360 times. You can use the Savana year, which is how many times how long it takes the sun to rise, 360 times. You can use the Sora year, which is how long it takes the sun to go from one equatorial point to the other. So from the vernal equinox all the way around to the vernal equinox once again. That's a tropical year. Then there's a lunar year of 360 tithis. These 4 years, the nakshatra year, savana year, Sora year, and lunar years, are the only 4 years mentioned in the ancient books. The sidereal year and the Chandra 360 nakshatra year are not given in the ancient books. What's a sidereal year? A sidereal year is when you say, okay, the sun is by that star. How long will it take for the sun to get to that star again? And that's 11 minutes longer than the Sora year. But the sidereal year doesn't exist as a year in any of the ancient books. The reason being because one thing all years have in common is the Earth. And when the sun moves from star to star, it's not Earth-centered. Time has to be Earth-centered. We're concerned with time on Earth. However, the sidereal year is the year that most astrologers use these days, even though it's not even a year mentioned in the old books. Astrologers who don't use the sidereal year usually use the Savana year, 360 days. So there's a big date between 360 days and 365 and a quarter days. I like using the Sora year for nakshatra dashas. Okay? Now the Chandra 360 nakshatras year is basically the time it takes the moon to move through 360 nakshatras. It's a little bit shorter, about a day shorter than a Sora or sidereal year. I programmed that because some people like to use that. But again, it's not a year that's found in any of the ancient texts. Time is very specifically mentioned in the ancient text. So anyone concerned with that, with time, study the Surya Siddhanta and see what it says about time. And for the Rashi dashas, we also have different options for the type of year length you might choose. Then you can calculate the nakshatra dashas from different planets. The moon is normally used, but some people like to use the Lagna or, for certain things, other planets. And we have some Muhurta options. The Muhurta you can calculate for local place, which means we divide the time from sunrise to sunrise by 30 for the local place. Or we can take a tithi and divide a tithi into 30 parts, which is the way that I like using it. But that's an option that you can select. The Vara, Horta, and Nadika, Vara is like the day of the week, the Hora is the hour lord, and the Nadika is the 1/60th part of a day. You can again calculate those for Yamakoti as per Surya Siddhanta and well as Varaha Mihira's astronomy book. You can calculate for Ujjain, which some old-time astrologers in India like to do. Or you can calculate for local place, which is the most common modern convention. But again, see, time and space are two different things. Right now, it's the same moment in time in India as it is in the United States, as it is in England, as it is in Africa. However, the space is different. So if we go look out our windows and look at the stars and look at where the sun is, they're in different places right now. So in one place the sun is setting, in another place the sun is rising, in another place the sun is at high noon. But it's still the same moment of time. So in astrology we have two kinds of calculations going on. We have space calculations and time calculations. Space calculations are different at all places on Earth. Space calculations are such things as combustion. Space calculations are such things as your bhavas, your lagna, the positions of the planets in their bhavas. The lagna especially is very space dependent. But then time dependent things like the Varahora Nadika, as well as the Pranapada, Bhavahora, and Ghatika lagna, these are time lagnas. These are called Kala lagnas, time lagnas. And Parashar says these lagnas are supposed to be the same for all places at the same time on Earth, which only works when we, like I said, calculate for an ancient prime meridian. The same goes for these other time factors, the Varahora and Nadika. So I I calculate them all from the ancient, prime meridian of Yamakoti, which we can determine the longitude and latitude of that place based on the Surya Siddhanta, and also Varaha Mihira's statements about the places, ancient places on Earth. So again, those are some options that might interest you to play around with. And then in screens, screens are all these screens we have in Kala that have different sections. We have a couple options. In the Mundane Screen, which is for calculating a chart to read the events for the year, like the world events. The Sankranti is when the sun enters a new sign of the zodiac. You can do that based on Sora or time signs, or you can do it on sidereal signs. Surya Siddhanta says to do it according to time-based signs. Okay. Another book, it's either Kala Prakasika or Muhurta Chintamani. They say they look at them from both. So one of those books, I don't remember which one, sorry, says to look at the charts calculated from both the Sora Sankranti as well as the sidereal Sankranti. Okay. So on the Avashtas calculated, which are some screens I have in the Yoga Judgment screen that measure strengths and things, you can use planetary aspects and conjunctions based on the aspects and conjunctions in the Rashi chart or the Varga charts. Okay. Those options aren't going to be that important for most people. All right, so those are sort of an outlay of the actual calculation options in Kala. We have a lot of them. If there's something you really need that you don't see, please write us about it. We are, making an effort to program a lot of options for people so that people can try different things and try different time calculations and whatever in order to, bring astrology to a more accurate method as a group effort. Okay, thank you.